Segundo tema, que é com o professor Brian William, professor de Massachusetts, do Institute of Technology. O Sistema de Cidades Inteligentes e Indústria 4.0.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I thought since this is day 4 for you, that I would try to give you a little bit of a lighter talk, right? If the slides come up. Just thinking. So while we're waiting for the slides, why don't I say a little bit, which is, so the last talk did a very nice job of talking about both how dynamic planning together with data analytics, right, big data, can significantly improve processes, right? And that's one aspect of, I believe, what's important in managing a city. But the other question is, how can some of these revolutions, right, impact our everyday life? So what I want to do when I get my slides will be to talk to you about the different ways that dynamic decision-making together with analysis of data can help the individual. And I'll think about how it can help the individual in 2 things that impact their life, right? Are we getting the video? Good, okay. So the first place that it can impact us is in our homes, and what is it like to live in our homes, right? How do we can make it more comfortable? The second is dealing with transportation. All big cities have a bit of a challenge in terms of dealing with transportation. So we'd like to improve the safety and the efficiency for the individual. And then for the city planner, the transportation operators, we want to be able to help them to do a more effective management of that as well. Okay, good. So I'm going to focus on the use of dynamic planning, right, to then help us in 2 places. One is to be able to make a safer environment and make it more efficient. And though I guess it goes without saying, we would like it to be less stressful, more comfortable, and a better quality in the city. So depending on how the timing goes, the first one aspect I wanted to look at, as I said before, is the impact on the home. Can you hit space? Oh, the second is to help you in modern cars. Now we're talking about autonomous vehicles, and certainly today's technology is making it safer. Next. We can then scale that to the overall city, right, and talk about how do a collection of, for example, solar and wind homes work together to be able to be more energy efficient. Next. And then we can talk about how do we manage the transportation network, right? And so in this case, I'll envision a network where our cars are a bit more capable than what we've seen before. And you'll see what I mean by more capable in a moment. Next. Yes, good. Okay, so what we want is to be able to have AI systems which can do dynamic planning and analysis, right, that helps us in many ways. The first is, it is about planning. We are performing tasks, whether or not it's driving or managing the transportation network or managing the energy or managing our home. So we'd like to help with all these different tasks by leveraging off of advances in planning. We want the systems to be collaborative. We don't want them to just take over our lives. We want to be able to talk to them about what we want them to do. We tend to do things that are too ambitious and too risky. We want our systems to tell us when we're taking too much risk and work collaboratively, right, to make things work out well. We want them to be easy to understand. They need to be able to explain their reasoning, right? And we need to explain our reasoning to them, right? We certainly want them to be aware of the risks to try to keep us safe, so we don't want automation to do dangerous things and take over our lives, right? We want them, in order to keep us safe, we want them to be thinking about what could go wrong And what is a backup plan? We don't want an autonomous car which says, uh-oh, I don't know what to do. You take over the steering wheel. Okay, so we want them to be thinking ahead for us. And then, of course, we would like them to be efficient. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a couple of themes, and we'll see how much time we have, right? But the first is I'll talk about, of course, every city manager today is thinking about how to incorporate flying cars in their city. So I will first start by talking about flying cars. Then I'll take what we learned by developing flying cars and make it a little bit more practical today. So I'll talk about how can we use this to make it safer to drive. And when I talk about safety and driving, I'll talk about...
Excuse me.
Sure.
Just press this.
It'll work? Good. Thank you so much. I'll talk about two things. One is often we have to deal with dangerous driving situations where somebody cuts you off, and how do you do that? Or an inept driver who doesn't know how people in Sao Paulo drive, right? Or in Boston or in LA. So I'll deal with that, and that's a system called Jordi that I'll talk about. But often we're dangerous at a more strategic level because we have busy lives and we didn't leave enough time to get to our destination and we rushed to that destination. So I'll talk about safety at that level. That will probably use my time. But if I have additional time, right, then I'll talk about how can we take the same ideas and apply them to smart homes that are more energy efficient as well. Okay, so let's start with a flying car. Okay, so I've been working with the Boeing Corporation for over a decade. And at one point, they showed us a concept that they were exploring, which I'm showing you to here. It's the concept that NASA asked them to explore, which is called a dual-mode vehicle, which can drive, right, and it can fly, right? And so that, of course, is something that we all want to have, right? But the problem is you have to go off and become a certified pilot to do this. So you convince your grandfather, your grandmother, this is a cool thing to have, but you need to be a certified pilot, and you're probably not going to get a lot of market. So Boeing came to us, if it goes to the next, with this concept, right? So this was, could we have AI to make it autonomous? So I'll let you see what it looks like. Okay, so what kinds of things were going on there? So the idea was a very simple interface, right? We decided to try to make it to be more like a polite taxi driver, right? And a good taxi driver, I think my memory of good taxi drivers were back in London, very polite, very safe, very knowledgeable, right? That a good driver kind of always knows a back route, right? If there's a traffic jam, Boston, they're very good at doing that. That if you're a tourist, right, then they're knowledgeable about the area, right? They can tell you where to go to the good restaurants, right? If you're running out of time, it can tell you another good restaurant, which is a little bit closer along the way. You get some good advice like, gee, you better arrive at the airport a little bit earlier and maybe you should eat your meal at the airport. So a lot of different things like that, right? Planning of contingencies, right? So in this case, the plane was trying to figure out that there were alternate landing points all along the way. Where could it kind of go if something went wrong with the airplane? It knew, for example, that you don't like turbulence, right? So it would try to steer clear of the weather system. But if you were a businessman and you were trying to get to your destination quickly, then it would say, okay, I need to make sure you arrive in time, so we'll go through the weather system. So a lot of very sophisticated reasoning going on, but we want the interaction to be very simple. So in that example, right, it was maintaining a collaborative dialogue, it was managing risk-taking, it was monitoring to your goals and seeing if they would fail, and then constantly creating backup plans. So that's the kind of reasoning that we can do today, although you may not be getting your own personal air vehicle next. But it is relevant in other things that we do when we live in cities, right? So we could use this kind of reasoning to help us as passengers on transportation networks. So my student who worked on this has now created a startup to try to help cities manage transportation across kind of multi-modes of transportation. You can use that to try to help manage your household. You can help shopkeepers. So those are at the individual level, but city management is a challenging job. So city managers would like to be able to manage their tasks and kind of adapt to uncertainty and risks. Somebody calling in sick, transportation managers, supply chain managers, and a lot of the problems that we heard about in the last talk. So what I want you to do is get a sense of the power of this kind of dynamic planning, right? And to do that, I'll first focus on autonomous cars, right? Or not even autonomous cars, but just safety in cars, right? And that'll probably consume the rest of the time. And as I said before, I'll look at it at a strategic level and then a tactical level, okay? So our system at the strategic level is called Uhura, and it's going to be a strategic safety advisor. Jordy is the one which is tactical. And they draw from two different elements, right, of the PTS demo that I just gave you before. Okay, so safety is about the big picture, right? I used to live in California, and the way that California manages traffic violations, I think, is very interesting. So California pays a lot of attention to driving safely. The police are polite. You drive too fast, they come up, they give you a ticket. And then what the ticket says is either you can pay some money and you can have some points on your record, right, which the insurance companies, right, will take a look at, or you could go to driving school. So you then ask, what do they teach you in driving school? You might think they teach you the rules of the road and they improve your driving. No, they don't do that at all, right? They get comedians who come in and they teach you about better time management, right? So it's not that people aren't good drivers, right? It's that people are not so good at planning, right? They get too busy, they get distracted, right? And as a result, they become reckless. So if you want to help people be safer on the roads, you don't pay so much attention to the driving. What you do is you help people manage their time better. So that's what Uhura does, okay? So we say that the issue of safety is that there's lack of planning, right? And the driver is anxious. And those two things are the biggest contributor to safety at the higher, more strategic level. That's complicated by delays in traffic, road conditions, right? Bad weather, unpredictable events such as accidents, and those are just adding to our lack of planning and our driver's state. The second thing that contributes is that we're always in contact, right? And so we have lots of disruptions that can seriously distract the driver. Certainly the first one is when we're running late, then we start thinking about how to replan for that, calling ahead, right? Or we run out of fuel. We get all these alerts and warnings from our phones. Those are constantly distracting us, right? We get phone calls, we get texts, and all of those are interrupting us, right? We get requests and adaptations which require immediate coordination, right? So what we want is to have the driver pay attention to the road, right? And have an assistant, often your spouse, but in this case, who is going to take care of those distractions. So really the two fundamental ideas are, one, having people plan well and assess risks and make sure that they have enough time, and then two, deal with the side things and let the driver focus on the road. Okay, so our vision, right, of Uhura is an AI assistant, right, that improves the driving experience and safety by managing this big picture of your life. And in order to do that, we need to take the elements of a personal assistant, a travel planner, and a navigator, and then help you reduce your stress. To do that, we do three things. One, help them to be able to plan. Two, we identify when things are getting too risky. And then three, we help the driver to coordinate with other people when we're running late while letting the driver pay attention to the road. So I'm just going to give you some sense of what this is like by identifying four themes, right? The first two are trying to make sure that you're not too risky. The second two are trying to deal with disruptions, okay, and coordination. So the first two is making sure that you don't have too much risk in what you're doing. The second is that you try to reduce the amount of risk. And then the last two are calling ahead for you and doing coordination. So the first example, right, I'll give you here, right, is helping the driver to make sure that they have enough safety margin, right? We're not packing too many activities in. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an example. So this was one of my former students, Tiago, right, from Sao Paulo, right? So this is an example of Tiago driving, and Tiago says, Uhura, I need to go to a coffee shop for 30 minutes for a meeting, and then I want to eat at an Italian restaurant and be back at home by 8 p.m. What Uhura will advise is, Tiago, I suggest that you leave in 20 minutes to play it safe. So Tiago knows about congestion at that time, how long it takes to do things, right? And suggests a safe plan. That's the simplest level of advice, right? But often we'll ask to do a set of things and they're just really impossible to do. So here's an example, right, where what Uhura will do, right, is give you some advice of how to do some things differently. Okay, so in this case, Tiago says, after work, I want to go to an Italian restaurant for an hour and arrive at home by 8 p.m. What Uhura knows is that the Italian restaurants are really far away, right? And there really isn't enough time. So Uhura says, but Uhura knows that Tiago also likes Chinese food. Not quite so much, but pretty well. So, and Uhura knows that there's a Chinese restaurant quite close by, right? So Uhura will say, are you okay?
Gas station first, then take you to a 4-star restaurant before going home.
So this is just a more detailed dialogue.
Complete the trip in 9 minutes.
I cannot complete the trip on time. Here is an alternative. Go to Pike Place Market for dinner, then relax at duration from 9 minutes to 11 minutes. Is that okay?
No.
I could take you to a 2-star restaurant rather than a 4-star restaurant. Then only relax the duration from 9 minutes to 10 minutes. Is that okay?
No.
I could take you to Burger King rather than 2-star restaurants. Then complete the trip on time. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, shall we start?
Yes.
Okay, sit back, relax, and enjoy this trip.
So what's important in this case, right, is if you have a rich model of your user, right? What are their likes, preferences, right? You understand what the risks and uncertainties are involved, right? Then an assistant can help you considerably, right, by exploring the different options to make you safe, right? And then you can focus on the road. So that's the kinds of things that we can do at the strategic level. I'm going to try to move forward and look more at the tactical level. So just bear with me for a moment. So the other behavior that Uhura have that I'm going to skip over, right, is if things are starting to run late, then what you can do is these kinds of assistants can call ahead, right? And they can talk to other people when you're running late, suggest to them, for example, is it okay if I arrive 30 minutes late? And they may say, well, I have another meeting, but why don't you come back an hour later and then stop at this place and have a cup of coffee, right? So you can do some fairly sophisticated coordination as long as everybody has a personal assistant which can aid in this level. Of course, the other problem that we have in terms of driving, right, is somebody cuts you off, right? And so how do you deal with that? Or people just don't know what the style of driving in that area is. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, so this is a picture of typical Boston traffic, right? I think this traffic jam started maybe about 30 years. You probably can see it. if you're still there, right? Or maybe those cars have gone by, right? But Boston is a city where it had a lot of cow paths, which turned into major roads, right? And people really don't know which lane they're in at any time, right? You just kind of move back and forth. So it's much more like a dance in Boston, right, than driving in your lane. If you want to be able to drive in Boston, then you do need to know that style of driving. And if you want to develop autonomous cars, then they need to be able to do the same. Okay, so at this level, driving is stressful and dangerous, right? We need to improve safety, right? Driving is stressful, and that makes it more dangerous. So we want driving to be more relaxed. So in order to do this, we want to reduce the cognitive load of driving, and we want to make it easy to transfer driving between the vehicle and the driver. Now that's been a big problem in terms of approaches to autonomous driving, at least in the US. Okay, so our idea is that we want the driver to still be thinking about driving, right? So we don't want to take that away, but we want to elevate it to a more cognitive level. So in order to do this, we want the driver to think in terms of maneuvering the car, not hitting the gas pedal and turning the steering wheel. So in today, if you ask your son or daughter, right, about their modern video games as they're doing parkour and jumping around and doing these amazing things, you'll see that they're not controlling the individual steps, right? They're maneuvering, right, their avatar through that space. And we want you to drive the car in the same level. So the driver will think about staying in their lane, speeding up, slowing down, moving left or right, but they never really touch the accelerator. We'll let the car do that level for you, right? So the human is still driving, right? Driving is simpler, right? So the cognitive load is less, but they're engaged, right? So there's a simple transition, right, from the control to the driver, right? It also lets the autonomous system have more time to, and more latitude to adapt safely. Okay, so that allows you different levels of modes. For example, the driver could say, switch to the left lane, and the car simply does that. But the car could say, okay, well, there's a car to my left, right? I can't move there. What I would do is I'll accelerate and move ahead of it. Or the car might say, the car is passing me, it's going quite fast, so I'll slow down a little bit and then move over to the left, or gee, it's not just plain safe. So a very simple maneuver, like moving to the left, could result in a very simple or a very complicated behavior, depending on what the environment is. So we've developed a system called Jordy, which is aware of the cars around it. It tries to predict what those other cars are going to do, and then based on those predictions, it decides how to act. So we've been looking at these in two different typical dangerous situations, getting on the on-ramp and making a left turn, and trying to think about how can Jordy do maneuvering in these situations. So in this movie, if it's going to behave, right? So what Jordy does is it has the knowledge of what it is risk and safety, and in that context, right, it ensures that its actions are safe with respect to what you consider to be safe and risk. So on the left-hand side is Jordy dealing with different kinds of situations, depending on the level of safety that the driver or the auto manufacturer has required. So in the picture on the careful driver, what we'll see is that our yellow car, right, which is the car that's our autonomous car, when it moves over to the left, right, it waits for the car ahead of it and then moves into the left lane. The right side, we told Jordy, right, to be aggressive. So we said reckless, not something you'd ever do, right? And so in terms of this recklessness, right, we told it a teenage thing, you know, only keep yourself safe 3 out of 4 times, and there you see it just kind of recklessly goes into the car to the left. The thing is we want them to be safe. So what's the important set of ideas in Jordy here, right? The important ideas is that Jordy is always thinking about what the cars are doing around it. Not only what is its path, but what is its goals, what's the sequence of maneuvers that it's likely to do. It thinks about its actions, right? What is it going to do, and how does the other cars likely behave in response to that, right? And then finally, Jordy is always thinking about a backup plan. So for the likely situations, it already has come up with a plan, right, to deal with those situations. And then if things start going worse and worse, it doesn't just deal with that crisis. What it does is it's always coming up with more and more backup plans. So it always knows what to do. From the standpoint of city management, because the technique can provide you a probabilistic guarantee of correctness, right, then you can quantify the notions of safety, right, by still giving a very positive driver experience. So at this, I'll simply wrap up, right? So mainly what I've done is to try to look at the idea of transportation, right, and focusing on how that transportation can make it easier to interact with our systems, but also make our life safe. That safety is both at the strategic level, right, and at the tactical level. That's helpful to the individual, but I believe also that kind of reasoning is helpful to the city planners as well. That as mayors, right, managing your city, then you have to deal with the overall strategy, but you need to be able to deal with the failures. I'm probably out of time now. 5 is okay? Oh, okay. Okay, then, is that okay? Some more time? Okay, good. So when you're managing an overall organization, right, you also have the issues of you want to be able to manage the overall strategy, you're oversubscribed, you want to make sure that you're reducing risk, you want to make sure that you're adjusting things to make sure that they're safe, right? But then as things go wrong, you would like some advice in terms of being able to deal with the strategy and contingencies. So in that sense, this reasoning is applicable, I believe, in a number of contexts. So it sounds like I have some additional time, so I'll elaborate a little bit, right? So I've shown you a pretty far out concept, and usually we adopt concepts in pieces. So let me just say a little bit about adopting these in pieces, right? So suppose we don't want our autonomous car, right, to be driving for us. Then the first thing that we do is we can use the kinds of capabilities within Jordy to be able to look at the traffic environment around them, right? Predict what the cars are doing, right? And allow that to help us safely maneuver. So in addition to the modern cars, which will give you a little light when somebody's on your left-hand side, what the car could tell you is that car looks like it's about to get off at this exit and is about to move over the right. Or it may say simply, this is a fairly aggressive driver. You need to be able to pay attention to that. So Jordy will develop a model, right, of the cars around it. It will decide, right, whether or not it will learn the behaviors of aggressive drivers, careful drivers, different styles of drivers, and then it can use that information to be able to predict the behaviors of cars around it and warn you, right, of those types of drivers, and then warn you about what they're doing. It can also use those models to mimic the behavior of that city style, right? So your behavior of your autonomous car is more predictable. It can also tell you how can you drive to be safe. So what you'll see on the right-hand side, right, is that Jordy is predicting what the car next to it is doing, and then it's deciding a path for the vehicle which it can prove is safe. You can use that to be able to look at your own driving behavior and have Jordy figure out, gee, I think you're going to be safe, so I need to warn you. Or take over or give you some additional advice when we think that the situation warrants it. Finally, the context I've been talking about so far has been one in which we have an autonomous car or a safety assistant, but the traffic around us, right, are a set of human-controlled cars, and we can't talk to them except for looking at their movements. In the future, as we have more autonomous vehicles and we have more vehicle-to-vehicle communication, another problem is can cars work collaboratively, right, to ensure safety and efficiency of the network. And so we're beginning to explore those collaborative issues as well. How are we doing on time? Okay, so I believe I have a little bit of time to talk about energy. So let me just take the same ideas and talk about how they would apply in the home and in energy. Over the last 10 years, we've certainly been interested in the use of the adoption of renewables, usually mainly in terms of energy, in terms of wind and solar. And so that provides a significant opportunity that we're already reaping the benefit. But one of the challenges, right, is that wind and solar are much less reliable, and so that can disrupt the power grid, create brownouts, and create other problems. So when we want to be able to have energy efficient buildings or power networks, see if it decides to change. What we need to be able to do is to deal with the uncertainty and the risk of this disruptive energy. So, and unless we can address that uncertainty, then that creates a barrier to adoption of renewables. So we've been looking at trying to assist that both in terms of individual homes and networks of homes. This is in a collaboration with the School of Architecture, which designed the house shown here, which we deployed in Trento, Italy. It's a nice solar house, right? So it has a solar array, so it mainly uses, right, solar energy. It has a set of windows that can open and close, can turn opaque, can be clear. So we can control the house, right? And we want to minimize the use of, terminate now? Okay, conventional energy, right? So just to tell you the concept here, so we can talk to the house the same way that we talked about before, right? It will control the house to maximize its use of energy, but the risk in this case is that the house tries to work so hard to save energy that it gets too hot or too cold. So we can use the same kinds of risk-based algorithms, and we've applied them here to make sure that the house is comfortable but energy efficient. The second idea then to scale it is you create a network of homes, right? And that network of homes can deal with the risk and the uncertainty by selling energy and power. But when they're selling energy, right, they have to deal with the fact that there's uncertainty. So not only do they use a market, right, to sell energy, but they also try to decide about how they're going to manage the risk together. And we've introduced the notion of a risk market to be able to manage that. Okay? So the main point here is that ideas of planning while managing risks, and user interaction can help us for tasks across the different kinds of issues that we deal with as a population, both as individuals within a city and in the process of managing the city overall. So if people are interested in exploring these ideas further, I would be delighted to talk about that, afterwards, but I think that there's a very exciting future for reshaping our cities based on these technologies.